ESI State of the Art talks. Really happy to be restarting these talks, and we'll be having them monthly from now on. We have a great list of speakers so far, but we're really excited to be starting the series with Onna Van Den Broek. Sorry, Onna, I messed that up again.
Perfect.
So Onna is joining us from the business school. She works on the interplay between sustainability, non-market strategy, and political economy. She did her PhD at King's College London in the fields of sustainability and management, where she did no less but win the Outstanding Thesis Award. Then, actually, as part of her PhD, she did she had visiting fellow positions at the University of Amsterdam, the University of North Carolina, and Copenhagen Business School, and then went to do a postdoc at Copenhagen Business School. And then she joined the Exeter Business School in 2022. And today her talk is entitled The Battle of Ideas in Organizing for Sustainability. Thank you, Onna. And I hope, can everybody hear us okay online? Maybe they can. Right, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Camille. That's oh, does it work?
Oh my God, this is. Oops. Enjoyed.
Should I be doing something or?
No,
I'll just
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Camille, for that introduction. Yeah, I'm really, and thanks everyone for joining us here today. I'm really happy to see so many faces. And I'm really honored that you asked me to give this talk, and also frankly a bit nervous, since I knew that there's so many great people who came here before me. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Onna, and as Camille said, I joined here around a year ago. I joined the business school and the ESI directly as well, after I finished my doctorate at King's College London. And all the work that I do sits at this interplay between business, sustainability, and politics. And when I was thinking, what do I want to talk with you about today, I immediately thought I want to talk to you about ideas today. And in particularly the existence of different ideas about how we should organize and regulate for sustainability, and the way these ideas are socialized, communicated, and how they then shape our institutions. I think I talk to a room of converted here when I say that the sustainability challenges that we're facing today, such as climate change, but also modern slavery, poverty, exploitation in supply chains, have a scale and a complexity. Check the airflow. If someone is not breathing well, tell me before you faint. Yeah, so they have a scale and a complexity that neither the public nor the private sector alone can fix. So we know that we need corporations, but we don't really know the exact role that corporations should play in the way we think and the way we govern a socially just transition towards a sustainable society. We have policymakers, businesses, civil society that all have different constituents, such as voters, social causes, shareholders, and as such, they all represent different ideas. And they give different meaning towards what sustainability means and what the right governance solutions are. So to make this argument, how do I? No, sorry. There. Oh, yes. So this is a short overview of what I want to do with you today. So first, I want to explain what it means to understand sustainability as an idea and how these discursive processes include and exclude certain ideas and how they shape our institutions. By doing this, I hope to show you that, as I will argue, sustainability is in essence a governance. Then I will draw on 4 different examples of my own work that hopefully illustrate how these processes work. So first, I will look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular how they were translated into the business context in a way that they remain broad and vague. Then I will look at the European Union and how the way that they made sense of corporate sustainability shapes which firms have access to politics and which ones haven't. Third, we'll focus on a completely different case again. We'll look at Rana Plaza and how cross-sector partnerships that emerged after the collapse of Rana Plaza, how they dealt with one problem, worker safety, in a variety of different ways, and what this means for the solutions that we see today. If time allows, I will look a bit also what this means for scholarship, so how we have different ideas about just as simple as what is a rule and what should a rule do in practice. And then I round it up and talk a bit about what we can do and what also the ESI can do. Yes. So for a long time, people concerned about environmental degradation and social injustice had the hard task of convincing others, because the majority of people didn't see that there was a problem. And also businesses either denied or downplayed that we had such a thing as environmental degradation. Well, either this was out of ignorance or out of malice. Now we have the case of Exxon, where we now know that already in the 1970s, they had scientists working for them that knew that fossil fuels were contributing to climate change. However, they opted to launch a campaign to spread doubt and denial about these scientific reports. So you can see that this is a real attempt to shape the ideas that are out there. Great BBC documentary if you have nothing to do tonight. But nowadays, I would say, we kind of know that there is an environmental problem. I think, well, here in the room for sure, but also outside, most people, it's really difficult to say that there's no problem at all. The evidence gets louder and louder. And for sure, there's still businesses that believe that it's not their role to solve this or that downplay the urgency of it. But to really say that there's no problem altogether, that becomes difficult. And while I say this, we just got the US just got a new speaker in the House who is a climate denialist. But I think if we talk about the 90-95% of population, we know that there are a few problems. Here you can see, I took a few reports. So if you look at like business people, 90% say, yes, we face big problems. So where we are at now is much more, the questions are much more about the nuances. What are the exact problems? Which issues should we prioritize? What are the methods? Which issues are worth solving? Which actors are responsible? What is the time scale? So the discourse in businesses started to shift from, well, it's not necessary that we talk about environmental degradation towards it is necessary, but it's very complicated. And this idea of complexity has really started people to feel overwhelmed, especially young people. It's felt people that are less affluent feel that they are being left out. And I think in general, there's this idea of inadequacy. We don't know, the technocratic character makes it so difficult. And I don't want to say that sustainability is not complex, because surely it is. But this discourse of complexity has really contributed by people not taking responsibility under the veil of this complexity. So we know that some sustainability issues are more urgent than others, some are a bit easier to fix. And so where should we start? What should the role be of industries and corporations in achieving sustainability? Well, it wouldn't be a lecture if there is not a Mentimeter these days. So I want to do a quick test, right? We have people from different disciplines here. So I want to illustrate what it means that there are different ideas, what type of ideas we're having, and what this means in practice. So if you go to this Mentimeter, you can either scan it. For the people that are online or unable to scan it, you can just go to menti.com and fill in the code 47848920. I will give 1 second. Yes. So the first question you will see is, what is the most pressing sustainability issue that we are facing? This is not, you don't get a grade, so just fill in the first thing that pops up. Don't see your name either. So if I understand Mentimeter correct, things should be popping up as you type. Did someone already put in a response?
Can you go back to the code?
Yeah, can you go back to me as well?
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, no, sorry, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, you should say it. Okay, well.
No, I haven't.
So there are 3 questions. There is, what is the most pressing issue? There is which industries are central in achieving a sustainable future, and there is what do businesses have to do to contribute to sustainable solutions. So I wouldn't be a lecturer if I didn't have a plan B if the technology doesn't work. So I am kind of guessing what the answers might be here. So I'm guessing if we talk about the most pressing issues, and please do fill in, I will send you the outcome of the Mentimeter once the talk is over, so you can have a look for yourself. I'm imagining people say carbon emission. I'm imagining people say clean energy, modern slavery, biodiversity. I think Camille has probably responded. Animal welfare, water. I was hoping to see something a bit along those lines. I don't know, I followed the instructions of the University of Exeter. Either way, in terms of industry, again, I'm kind of guessing that you said aviation industries, agricultural, tech firms, energy, and then in terms of what businesses have to do to contribute to these solutions. I would have probably said reporting and transparency, accountability, consumer, maybe someone talked about individual behavior, innovation. I think maybe, I know Alan is in the room, maybe he talked about competition and free markets. Due diligence and liability, peer-to-peer learning, new business model. I'm not sure Laura is online, she probably has talked about degrowth. Sorry, that nice trick didn't work out there. But I just wanted to show that there's this whole full variety of things. So my scholarly tradition and the way I approach these problems is from discursive institutionalism. And I won't bore you too long, but to give kind of in a nutshell what this means, is that sustainability, and particularly corporate sustainability, it's an idea. It's a normative and changing belief about how corporations should give meaning to their impact on society and the environment. So in the field of contestation, it's required to take this interpretive approach towards this idea. So both the central to this tradition is that it's both about the ID, so the content of ID, what is sustainability, but also the discursive processes through which we exchange and co-create what it means. If I talk about corporate sustainability, what you think it is, there's a wide variety of options, and we picked one of those options. So why is it that this one ID prevails over all the others? So that's the last part, how it then shapes institutions. So policies, EU policymakers making sustainability policies, how they interpret it. And these IDs are not accidental, right? They are used and they're embedded in interest. And these interests are, again, they are interpretations of material reality. So they're around IDs. So the existence of these multiple IDs and interpretations means that it ultimately becomes, or perhaps always has been, a governance issue. So the way we steer society, the direction we give towards society. So different actors try to steer society in a different way for what sustainability means for them. This is where I take my sailing lessons, so I thought this would be a nice way to show you how it works. And so everyone tries to influence and steer the boat into different directions. Business tries to shape and frame the way society thinks about sustainability in the way that benefits them. They want to set the rule, prescribe certain behaviors, set norms, regulations, expectations that fit the way that they understand and benefit from sustainability. So now I hear you think, well, this is all nice, it's rather theoretical, but show us the evidence. How does this work in reality? So I want to take you along 4 stories of 4 case studies that I have researched together with co-authors. So the first example I want to bring you on is the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And I'm kind of assuming that most people already know what I'm talking about here, but they are a set of 17 goals for government, business, civil society to achieve in 2030. They were adopted in December 2015 by member states and a multi-stakeholder consultation. So it means that the outcome that we see here, these 17 goals, are already the outcome of a battle of ideas. Businesses came in and they said, this is how we think about sustainability. Civil society came in, they said, this is how we think. And we can see this about the end goals. There's a goal about economic growth. I would say that's highly problematic if you want to achieve the other goals. So the SDG, yeah, this is good. The SDGs ultimately target government. So business had to make sense. What does this mean in the corporate context? This effort was led by the Global Compact, which is the United Nations arm for responsible business. And while they made sense about what this means in the corporate context, they kind of formed this network of all these different actors that were pushing into different directions. Everyone wanted to give it a different meaning and something that fitted what they want. So we have principles of responsible investing, global reporting initiatives, but also consultancies, PwC, smaller consultancies such as sustainability, the World Benchmarking Alliance, etc. Is this the right one? Yeah. So in the end, my co-authors and I, we showed that through these networks, through these discursive processes, they purposely made and maintained the perspectives that the SDG is a North Star. And this is a very strong metaphor, because the North Star is something that we all strive to, something that all else rotates around. And this happened through the work of three mechanisms. So first, the perspective was made. The first few actors came together and said, okay, we need to make a consensus that fits all our ideas. So we need something broad that fits us all. And they make this consensus. And then every business actor that wanted to work on the SDGs had to accept that this is the way they should be interpreted. And then they retrofitted that to what they had already been doing in the past. And the result of that is what we see is very vague and broad business action. There's actually no really clear ways of how we can engage with the SDGs, but it's made in a way that fits everyone. And now it's debatable whether that's how we want it to be. So let's look at another example again. The European Union. And particularly the importance of corporate social responsibility. So for those who are confused, corporate sustainability, corporate social responsibility, what's the difference? For me, there's no difference, they're just different words. That being said, it's common knowledge that we know that businesses access policymakers. What is less known is which are specific businesses that gain access to the political context and which and who doesn't. And what role does these kind of corporate social responsibilities, which I will refer to as CSR from now on, how does that influence who gets access and who doesn't? So to answer this question, I talked to many European commissioners, parliamentarians, businesses, and civil society. And there's some good news. On the one hand, European policymakers, they know that CSR is a contested concept, right? Everyone is aware nowadays about greenwashing, about firms making claims that are not true. Again, if someone is feeling low, take a breather. So that's really good. There's this awareness that we shouldn't take corporate responsibility at face value. Now, what is more interesting for me is that the concept was still being used to say which firms were given access and which weren't. So I found 4 different discursive processes through which this happened. So on the one hand, we had commission officials who didn't have a lot to do with businesses, and they just said, CSR is contested, so we won't talk to business. So this was a very small group, but they were still there. Then there was another strategy where they said, well, it is very contested. We say in public, businesses are doing a lot of greenwashing, but in private, we still talk with them. And particularly together with NGOs to kind of give it a bit of a flavor of responsibility. These were mainly Euro parliamentarians. And then there is the strategy where, that's why I said they are just words, where CSR was replaced to corporate sustainability. So these were mainly commission officials, bureaucrats, where they said, yes, CSR is not good, but we can talk about corporate sustainability, which is much more technocratic, which is very much about scientific evidence, etc. So they decontested it by introducing a new concept. And then there is a last group, which are more DG officials, so even more bureaucrats than the commissioners, who decontested CSR through measurement. So they said, yes, CSR is contested, but we can measure it. And as long as people provide the data, we measure it, we can take that at face value. Yeah, so let's look again at another example, the Rana Plaza. So I'm not sure who's familiar with this, but in 2013, Rana Plaza was a big factory in Bangladesh and it collapsed, leading to many workers losing their lives. And this really illustrated to the broader world that we had supply chain issues. There were big problems happening in the supply chain, particularly about safety and welfare of our workers. So after that, the hundreds and hundreds of cross-sector partnerships were initiated, meaning that businesses, civil society, governments came together and provided solutions. So my co-authors and I were particularly interested in the role of donors. So who funds these initiatives and how does that shape the type of initiatives that spring to life? And in very short, we found that who funds an initiative matters because just by the act of deciding who you fund, you can decide which issues are worth acting up and which methods are valid. So we looked at who is funding these international CSPs, lots of government money, but also many businesses that provide money, and how this defines the issues that they choose to focus on and how they do so. So in terms of implementation methods, but also partners. And this kind of illustrates the variety that was out there. So there was loads on poverty, gender equality. There was a bit on regulatory capacity, victims, industry safety, and in terms of how it ranged from advisory, advocacy to finance and governance. And then depending on who was funding, this is why there's kind of the hand, they decided which issue they were picking and which method. So businesses, very popular, gender equality. My co-author talked to a few female workers on the factories in the city. Were so done with all the businesses that wanted them in their CSR programs because there were so many gender programs being rolled out. And gender is really important. But there's so much that a female worker can do in a day to provide to all these programs. So the end is that there's only partial solutions. So not all areas are covered and some are really over represented. So the last case study that I wanted to look at is academia. So because I now looked at 3 practical things, but there's also a lot of battle of ideas in academia. So one key point of difference for us, I'm a management scholar, is how we understand rules. What is a rule? And I looked with a few co-authors into how people define rules. And you can see that there is really variety, but there are 3 prominent lenses that are often taken. So one is a group that sees rules as boundaries. So prescribing certain types of actions. Then there are the people that see rules as forms, so objects of deliberation. Rules as competitive advantages, so they pursue people's interest over the interests of others. And last, there's rules as principles. So this is really about processes of social evaluation. And which lens was taken in this study really defines which issues are being studied. So because these are the 4 dominant lenses, we have a really large bulk of research that focuses on rules that resemble this outlook of the world, while we leave out all different research questions. So we identified 2 upcoming systems that are really important in kind of bringing in this bigger picture. So rules as cognitive frames, so bringing in the individual sense making of rules. And rules as systems, about thinking how different rules, how they interconnect with each other and how they work together. So we've now looked at 4 different cases. So I want to go back to kind of the framework that I talked to in the beginning, and what these examples show together. So in terms of IDs, we talked about the Sustainable Development Goals as an ID, corporate social responsibility as an ID, worker safety as an ID, and rules as an ID. In the case of the SDGs, we saw that the discursive processes through these networks of different business actors reframed what the SDGs meant in the business context and ultimately changed the discourse of the United Nations. In CSR, we talked about how different European Union policymakers, how they made sense of CSR, how they decontested it, and how that shaped which firms had access to policymaking and ultimately the type of policies that were being made. In terms of Rana Plaza, the worker safety, we saw how these cross-sector partnerships all made sense of the same problem in so many different ways, and how that ultimately shaped the governance in Bangladesh dealing with these issues. In terms of rules, we saw how academics made sense of rules and how they, through journals, conferences, created these 4 prominent lenses that shapes the bodies of knowledge we have and includes and excludes certain types of knowledge. So I can hear you think, okay, Onna, you talked about kind of your theoretical framework, how it works in practice, but what now? So what? How do we take it from here? So the way I see it, diversity of ideas has a lot of strengths, right? In an ideal world, we have pluralism. Everyone brings their own idea to the table. We listen to everyone's ideas. The ideas represent the whole body of ideas out there. We weight them and then we come with the best solutions. If this was the world, pluralism of ideas would be perfect. Unfortunately, not everyone's idea is we deem as valid as other ideas. Some voices are being heard, some voices are being excluded. And because of that, not every idea has the chance to really be there and really convince other people. So what is the other alternative? Should we orchestrate ideas? Should there be like this visible hand that kind of coordinates all these ideas and make sure that all the ideas are heard? Again, in an ideal world, it would be perfect if we knew all the options out there and we said there are 10 ideas, they cover the different topics, and we're going to discuss them now. But in reality, ideas become very rigid, they become less flexible, there might be pathways that we haven't envisioned yet, and it loses the innovative character. So what I advocate for in my work is kind of combining these both. So having an orchestration of the main body of ideas and leaving room for other ideas to emerge and make claims on bodies of knowledge as well. For this to work, I say there have to be 2 things. First of all, we need to be very explicit in our assumptions, goals, and interests. Currently, it's way too implicit. You have to guess what people think a rule is, something that's standard. And to really know the ideas that are out there and to make these assessments and evaluations, we need to be more explicit in the ideas that we are bringing out there. And outcomes need to be much more concrete. Currently, and I think especially in academia, we have the tendency to be very abstract and very out there. But we need to be much concreter, and I'm not saying in the assumptions, but in the outcomes that we're creating, so that again all the ideas can work together. So I also thought what this means for the ESI if we would do this. I think that I've already talked to quite a few people here in the room, because together with a colleague from La Rochelle, we've been thinking a lot about interdisciplinarity and how we can best combine ideas from natural science and social sciences and ultimately become more interdisciplinary. Right, so we know that to speed up the sustainability transition, we need to become better at combining ideas and speaking to different crowds. And we need to share our ideas more convincingly and tell stories better. And I would say that at ESI, we all work on the same puzzle, but we take different angles. We as a body of people, we present a diversity of ideas. And we can leverage the diversity of voices while being also sensitive for the ideas that we are excluding and including in our work, and making sure that we don't shift our attention away from more systemic issues. And I know that people here are really motivated about creating these waves of change. So we need to combine the material with the ideation. And this is by far not the best metaphor that I will think about, hopefully, in my career. But how I can see is that we all have different ideas, we all are different shapes, and we all have different things that we bring to the table. But if you look at this, there's still lots of white spaces. So to really make sure that we cover the whole surface of sustainability, we need to file these ideas, and we need to make sure that they speak to each other, that they fit to each other, that they bring one puzzle to the forefront, so that in the end we come into this. So it's not that we're all, I don't like this narrative of all being parts of the same puzzle. No, we need to make sure that our small puzzle pieces actually fit each other, because otherwise our work just happens in isolation. So I think I spoke much faster than I did when I did my practice round, so I'm 8 minutes earlier, but at least more, hopefully more room for questions and debate amongst each other. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Great talk. Questions?
To silence. Thank you very much, Onna. That's great. Thank you. Really, yeah, you still to start off your career, but you're already bringing a lot of expertise and experience from so many different domains together, and then apply it to a concrete space like the ESI. So that's quite ambitious. So well done, well done. Okay, could you just expanding the last point?
Mm-hmm.
In the real world,
yeah.
I mean the ESI is in the real world, but so
One foot.
maybe not. So can you think of any sort of best practice examples where this pluralism and coherence that you talk about
Mm-hmm.
has successfully been brought together? Can you think of any examples? And for me, the question is how do you actually do that? Because in a way, it's that that puzzle has been tried to be kind of solved for a long time. How do you bring these different ideas together, give everyone a voice, but still in the end be strategic, coherent, and actually go somewhere?
Yeah.
So it's a quite a utopian sort of idea that you can achieve that.
Yeah.
Can it be achieved, or is it kind of a never-ending ambition that
Well, I think so. If we talk about the ESI, why I don't think it's a real world example, because we know the people that are working here, right? We know the IDs that here, so we can map them and we can say, okay, where do we still have space? Where are the white spaces, and how can we kind of create overlap that we cover this whole surface? In the real world, often, first of all, you don't know all the IDs that are out there, and it's really difficult not only to gather that, but then to coordinate action. Like we all listen to Camille, of course. But in the real world, we don't have a Camille who tells everyone what to do. And I think it does happen, and it often happens when there's a concrete problem that's urgent enough for people to act on. So now I was very critical about Rana Plaza, but they have solved quite a few issues that were happening there. What hasn't happened is looking at a more systemic level about all the issues that are there. And then looking, okay, so how is each part being covered? To a certain extent, there has been some research. I think New York Stern University has done some of these kind of mapping exercises. People just haven't really listened to it. And I think one example, which I sometimes use in my teaching as well, is, I don't know, when I was growing up, the ozone layer was the big issue, right? Everyone was talking, there's a hole in the ozone layer, we're all gonna die. Through governance, we haven't really fixed it, but there has been a certain agreement on how to tackle this problem, bring in different ideas, create a solution to it. And it's not that big, at least I don't hear anyone saying that we're all gonna die because of the hole in the ozone anymore. So I think there are examples, but then it often becomes much more localized and smaller of scale and much more concrete problems. Yeah. And I think there are many people here who probably have much more expertise and also good examples that they can bring in. So feel free to chip in if you have a good example. Faye has a good example.
That was brilliant, thank you. I was relevant to this. I was thinking about scale, and I tend to work on the local scale, partly through pragmatic reasons because I've got young children, but also I I can conceptualize that a lot more easily. And I find in my PhD research, I think you came to talk that I'm getting? Yeah. So for Stefan's question, I like really concrete methods, mixed methods that can speak across disciplinary boundaries, so qualitative and quantitative. This has probably all been discussed 20 years ago, whatever, but yeah, concrete methods like Q methodology, qualitative comparative analysis, that kind of thing, also with practitioners, but it's confined. So my research is probably going to be Cornwall and it's on one problem. Yeah. I find it quite hard to conceptualize the governance, the large scale businesses and things, which is where, I'd hope for other people around the ESI and globally to kind of talk to those solutions. But yeah, I think that we can solve these issues as long as they're defined and kind of local.
But then I would challenge that in some way and think if we have all these local problems, defined problems, right? They add up, and then we have hundreds and thousands locally defined concrete problems. So it's about finding, if you kind of step one, I think your work is absolutely amazing and we should have these concrete local things. But then they add up and there's a lot more. So then the next step is to coordinate. So how do all these local bounded initiatives, how are they working together and how are they all part of the solution? Are we missing on certain topics these type of local activities? So it's about having kind of, you have these glasses, right? Where you can, multifocality glasses, I think they call it, where you kind of can zoom in and then you zoom out again. So we need to become better at zooming very deeply in and then zooming out and seeing the bigger picture again. And I don't have an answer, I don't have an idea how to do it, but I think that's what we should be doing.
What about like system, like sort of a system? I was thinking of like adaptive management kind of thing, where you kind of have a process of gathering about these ideas and everything you've mapped out, but that's flexible enough to speak to different localities. And this idea of like bottom up rather than top down. Definitely speaking a bit out of my comfort zone here, but that's kind of business and.
No, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I agree.
Because like the Rana Plaza you gave as a good example, but yeah, do you have any examples of this sort of exactly as you described, the kind of management of the local solutions?
So before I joined academia, I was with the UN Global Compact. So what they do, they are like world level, global level, and they look at different issues. So there's oceans, there's a team working oceans. I worked for Business for Peace. We had, when I was there, I think they call it climate. They will change a lot, but there you get the gist of it. There are all these different teams working on different topics with businesses from around the world. And every country has its own local network that then brings parts of these topics into the local context and then works more locally. So now I can talk probably for 2 hours criticizing the UN Global Compact, but at least it is a first attempt at kind of trying to do this localized character with the global character. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yes, picking up on what you're saying about the global compact, and interesting that you worked there. I wonder if did you ever experience any kind of conversation about the actual systemic problems? The problems that nobody really wants to talk about in terms of the financial system, and actually corporate responsibility is primarily to shareholders and profit. I wonder, are those conversations actually had in the compact, or is it, oh no, we can do this really great bit of CSR that will look great, but also we're looking at producing profit, but we're also doing those.
Well, on the one hand, for sure, there was and there still is talk about financial systems. And I think financial systems is an easy way into systemic problems. When I was there, it has changed a bit, but degrowth, for example, wasn't talked on. So there are certain topics that are critical and in some way systemic, I would say, that definitely people are talking about. And then degrowth, we talked about it a bit, but then it would be like the junior people in a small corner over beers. So it's not that it's not talked about, like you have the individual employees, of course, as well. But it's difficult that's also the thing with IDs and about including certain voices and excluding others. So I get very frustrated. I know that plastic is, it's very important that we reduce plastic. But when I was collecting data, all the EU could talk about was this movie about a turtle being wrapped into plastic. Absolutely devastating, I agree, but it's not the most systemic issue that we're facing at the moment. So it's about some ideas sell so well and are so convincing and they're visual and they draw people in, whereas degrowth, so far no one has really made a sexy video about it, right? It's not, it hasn't brought in this good convincing element yet. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that's very purposefully made that way. Yeah, systemic, yeah, these are definitely the more difficult conversations to have, but they are being held, but more in corridors, I would say. And sometimes people try small initiatives to act on it, but the systemic issue is not solved with a marginal solution. So we don't really get anywhere in the end so far. I also try not to become this doomist that thinks that the whole society is, I think for me at least, I don't know for other people, but it's quite easy with my research to become this doomist that thinks that all governance is there to fail and it's not serving us. So I do try to also look at examples that are actually being successful and that are bringing about some change.
Mara?
I think I went back a little bit to the previous comments about interdisciplinary, because I've been working on some interdisciplinary projects. And from my experience, of course, I didn't make that project. So I was not the one responsible for starting. So I cannot really answer the question, how to, like Stefan was how to. But I know that working interdisciplinary is hard because this is the method that you face when working with all people of these things. And you have to do compromises on your own and on your own your investment. And the project I was working with was the water, energy, environment nexus trade-offs, where you need energy to extract water, but then you need water to produce food, and then you produce wood to produce energy or food. So this needs an interdisciplinary approach, and it was applied at the local and regional scale. And this brings me to the discussion that what you were mentioning. We have a lot of local case studies in the project, but actually that cannot be scaled up. It's not possible, and you cannot really generalize and come in and then come back to it and say, oh well, let's do a rule, and then we do the rest of the world like that. It's not possible. For many different reasons. One is cultural reasons that cannot be replicated from one region to another region. But all of these cases are evidence of what it is necessary to do. You need to tackle the problem from all these different perspectives, from engineers' perspective, from the cultural perspective, from the policymakers. We work a lot with the local policymakers, the ones that take decisions. And that was really important in this field. So there's lessons on all of that inform, let's say, the next level of and how to do. But I think that scaling out is very difficult on this type of project, and what it should be. But just learning that, and it's really, from my perspective, it's really important. It's almost think how to make much more interdisciplinary research. It's a big compromise because as a researcher you need to publish, and if you publish as interdisciplinary, maybe you don't have higher impact as you publish in your own discipline. And there's not so many journals with high impact, and then you can want to do that because you are measured because of the impact. So it is things you as a researcher have to think about. But I think we should take much more those projects.
Yeah, I think I have 3 immediate reactions. And I think it's a bit of a shame that one of my colleagues is not here. Because when you think about scaling from a business case, you can kind of scale up, but you can also scale out. So it's not necessarily that you blow this project up and it kind of becomes global all of a sudden, but you could not really replicate, but take the lessons and then have like small lessons everywhere. So they also, in policy studies, they call this diffusion and the localization of diffusion. So for example, you have a policy, then another country thinks, that's a nice policy. So they take the policy and they adapt it to their local context, take the lessons, and then kind of create their own policy again. So you see throughout the world that many policies actually look a lot alike, because people look at other countries and other places. So I think it's good to not just think about scaling up, but also kind of this scattering and lessons being learned and things moving around and learning from these situations. And then in terms of interdisciplinarity, I completely hear you in terms of challenges, especially as an early career researcher. You have to publish in certain disciplinary journals and that are not always open to interdisciplinarity. So there's a lot to do in making these journals more open and perhaps also thinking strategically to have a project and take part of that and then translate these ideas to your own discipline. So it is maybe interdisciplinarity is not achieved at every level, but maybe it's achieved in a project, but not in the publication outcomes. So we need to think strategically how interdisciplinarity works for the questions we ask and for our own personal careers as well. Hopefully, in an ideal world, this wasn't necessary, right? But we're not living in an ideal world. And I do like the idea of, so I work often with political scientists about them bringing the ideas that we discuss to a business audience and kind of thinking about the words that you can use, the ideas they have, and how you can bring them into that conversation. For me, that's, I really enjoy that part as well.
I have a question on this sort of battles of idea in the context of polarization that we are arguably living in today's society. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, according to many, our societies are polarizing in the sense that there are some ideas that we can't accept, we don't even want to hear in different, in different directions, of course. Yeah. So, what's your take about that? Which direction we should go in terms of?
I think it's always dangerous if you don't listen to people's ideas. And that's not to say to give everyone a platform to share their ideas, but especially politicians. So the ideas and sentiments, so I live now in Cornwall, I live really in a village where there are mostly Cornish people and people are quite poor as well. So their ideas don't always have the, we don't always agree on ideas. I'm much richer than most people in my, much more educated than people from my village. But there's also a reason why this is happening, right? Because they are, I got the benefits of globalization. I grew up in the Netherlands, now I stand here, I got really great education. So there's this groups of people that are being left behind, and I think that's really dangerous. And that's also part of the globalization, of this backlash of globalization that causes polarization. And there's great studies out there that talk about this. But for us sustainability scholars, it's so important that we bring people along this journey. And it's often one of the dangers is that we just talk to the converted the whole time. And it takes a big toll. I don't want to talk with people about sexism every day and how I experience that. But there is also a responsibility that we have in making sure that our ideas come across and that we translate them to the people that are hearing them, and that we don't say, you have different ideas from me, so your ideas are invalid. And again, there's a really fine line because some ideas are overtly sexist, racist, climate denial, which also touches on sexism and racism. And that's a really difficult line to navigate. But I don't think the answer is to be silent and to dismiss people, because it's like anxiety. If you don't talk about it, it only gets bigger and bigger. So if we don't talk about polarization, it only gets bigger and bigger. And I know also, this is also a cultural view that I have, right? I'm Dutch, I have a French husband, and when we talk about these things, we really don't agree. Because I'm much more about bringing things in the open and having no taboos and talking about everything. Whereas for him, that's not a solution. So I'm bringing, just putting out there that I have a very distinct cultural view on this as well. Yeah.
Sure. I don't know who put their hands up first. Marcus, do you know? Should we go Marcus?
And a question in terms of the context of communication, how much should we as academics go to acknowledge ideas? Because climate denial for me is not an idea, it's just, it's not based on any fact or anything. And it doesn't really relate to any kind of physical models or anything. So
Yeah.
being a mathematician or natural scientist, I guess there's a lot of struggle in a lot of the social sciences, kind of, not necessarily academia, but I guess what is taken in social science.
Yeah.
And then what ideas, or what is called ideas, or how far should we go to acknowledge things?
So I think this is where working across disciplines comes in, right? Because I think if I am not a natural scientist, I'm a social scientist, but if I work with a natural scientist, I wouldn't expect necessarily them to account all the ideas, right? That would be my task. I would need them to explain to me the science and the material facts that are out there. So I think that's exactly why we need interdisciplinarity. And I think for me, climate denialism is important because what I look at, what I research, ideas are core. But that doesn't mean that's critical to your work and to where you can create change. But what is then important if you have facts that I can use in my research and in my outreach, that we can combine our knowledge and create a strategy that kind of reaches these different audiences. Does that make sense? It's still a bit, it's not the best answer out there. But I think this is the core of why interdisciplinary.
Related to that is sort of the question in terms of, we talked about rules, and I guess rules are, I mean, that rules which are based on physical systems. For example, the planetary boundaries. Things, I guess people start recognizing, business, for example, will start recognizing because it's actually, for example, insurances, they recognize that climate change is one of the bigger things they have to deal with in the next 20 or 50 years, and that's kind of the business model to insure into the future. While, for example, some of the rules, they are kind of like some people said before, made up, like financial rules or financial systems. They're not inherently natural systems. So I guess the question is like how to bring them together and actually where you put priorities. I think that's one of the issues.
But I think, as I said, I think it's about combining the material with the ideational. Like there are clear material dimensions, but then there's an interpretation of what is material, which is this ideational. There's nothing in my, well, this is, we go really to the core of science here, right? But nothing is only material, because as long as we humans are here, we have interpretations and sense making of the material. So I think if we talk about planetary boundaries, you have perhaps the science, but for all the businesses, it's the way that they perceive it, the way, the things that they pick on, the things that they don't pick on. So there is a certain point. Ideas are nothing if they're not shared, right? If you do your research and you only keep it for yourself and perhaps 10 colleagues, what is the impact of these ideas, even if they are material facts? If they don't come into this kind of ideational dimension, they're not being socialized, they're not made sense of, and they're also not being acted upon. And now I can assume that you don't have time to spend 3 days a week about the ideational dimension of your work, right? But it is worth thinking or teaming up with people who know more about the ideational dimension, about how to get the material that you get and how to get that out there for other people to understand, and also to make sure that there's not this misinformation and that people interpret it in ways that are coherent with the natural facts. Yeah, I can probably talk about this also for hours, because there are all these different layers that come into play, of course, as well.
Thank you. Your focus on ideas is really fascinating. In order to get a bit of a conversation, I was expecting perhaps a bit more unpacking around where ideas come from. You quickly mentioned sense making. if you start taking ideas out of context,
Mm-hmm.
it's quite limiting your capacity as a researcher in you to theorize further when you go into the discursive, in the institutionalism. Simply put, ideas are honed in cultures, right, or political views, and they are entangled with ecologies, with what we call materiality, I would call ecology. And you can't separate them. They are they are just part of a trinity, in my view. Not my view, actually. If you take them out of that trinity, they become abstract objects.
But I would never take an idea out of its material reality or out of its culture.
Right.
I think I totally agree that ideas are embedded in cultures, economies, history, etc. But we can look at ideas in different concepts and see how they overlap, how do they differ. Like humanity is very interesting as well. Sometimes an idea pops up, especially if you look through history, and then the same idea pops up somewhere else again. It's because ideas are embedded in their context doesn't mean we can't let them speak to each other. And yeah, I would always acknowledge where ideas come from and where they are embedded. But we can compare ideas and see how they differ, how they are similar, and then we can theorize why they are different or similar. But yeah, I think ideas are highly contextual. It's also individual, right? Your individual background shapes the idea that you bring forward. Where you live, who you know, how you grew up, the environment that you live in, everything shapes your ideas. But we can still abstract to certain levels based on those contextual differences. I think Jamie as well.
Sorry, I wanted to ask you about your paper on SDGs. You spoke about, the sort of discursive institutionalism stuff, and I wanted to ask you, and you said it was such almost like an empty idea almost. Do you think that that's like it reflects how we just like people just don't want to have this like concrete ideas of how we need to enact change? Is it like, maybe another way of putting it, are the sustainable development goals like really just making us nicely complacent and thinking that we're addressing like these big issues, but in actual fact, we're not really getting there? And then another question I want to ask, it sort of relates to overall what you're saying, is that I've heard it said before that like when people are trying to address like social and environmental and like business goals, the point is that they are never really going to be able to be done all together, and we're really just like fighting against thunder, and we just can't do all three at the same time. Have you found that when you were like in your like experience?
Yeah, so I think the SDGs is interesting. People want to stay relevant, right? And whether that is by not changing or by changing a lot, they want to stay relevant and they want to be seen as the ones that are making the change. So if I look at all these really nice consultancies about sustainability, they all want to be the ones that came up with the framework, that provided the solution to sustainability. So I'm not really sure it's about not wanting to change. Everyone wants to be seen as the most relevant one. That's why, for example, GRI will say reporting is the most important thing we need to do. The principles of responsible investment will say investment is the most important thing we do. And that's all okay as long as we then know that every idea is covered and we're not only having empty concepts everywhere. And I think in your last comment, remind me one of
three sort of like,
oh yeah, about the three. I think you cannot separate the three actually. You cannot, if you do environment, you do social, whether you want it or not. If you do social, you do environment, whether you want it or not. So I think it's really a human invention that we can separate the social, ecological, and governance issues. They are so inherently linked. It doesn't matter. If you act on a small thing, you will act on all three of them. And by doing nothing is also, being silent is also an act. Doing nothing is also an act. It's also a deliberate act of doing something. And so I don't think we can absolutely never distinguish between those three.
Okay, we've reached the end of the session, but we can continue the discussion with coffee and biscuits. So we're now moving into a business school event that's going to take place with these coffee, biscuits, tea, etc. And then we'll have another talk, which Stefano will introduce afterwards. So I don't know if you want to say a few words, or you want to say a few words, Stefano?
You are doing that, I think.
Yeah, we have a Domenico D'Antonio with us. Continue with a workshop very soon. So in basically 1 hour. Meanwhile, we like to mingle somewhere.
Make sure you stick it out to the end, so make sure you get your coffee and your biscuit. And then this year, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.